Genshin's oldest character models honestly still hold up visually thanks to the game's beautiful anime stylization, but when you compare them to the newer models from this year, the difference in detail and quality is astonishingly clear. Thanks to the updated outfits we got in Luna 4, we have two direct comparisons to demonstrate just how far Genshin models have come in terms of both design and technique, which I'll break down so you can fully appreciate them. This video is sponsored by PlayStation and the 7 Deadly Sins Origin, a new open-world RPG based on the hit anime and manga franchise. Built around the PlayStation 5's next-gen hardware for the smoothest, most graphically advanced experience, the game faithfully recreates the setting of Britannia in both scale and visual spectacle, and you'll have the freedom to traverse it in a number of different ways, all while fully immersed by finely tuned DualSense haptics and adaptive triggers. Experience an original story while playing as your favorite 7 Deadly Sins characters in real-time action combat, featuring a wide variety of action styles and weapon-specific skills to choose from. You can even fight alongside your friends in the game's multiplayer mode. The console version of 7 Deadly Sins Origin is exclusive to the PS5, and you can download it now for free using the links below. Thank you to PlayStation and Netmarble for supporting the channel. As always, these models are sourced from a playbox.com, which is a Chinese website, and this is using Festivity shader for the Goo engine fork of Blender. The easiest thing to compare is, of course, the hair. We used to call out things like Diluc and Albedo's hair being complete catfishes with how much better it looked in the 2D art compared to their 3D models, but nowadays the hair is definitely depicted accurately. On Ether's front bang alone, we could see it goes from 2 chunky spikes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual segments, and then repeat that for the entirety of his hair. But of course, that's only about half of what makes it look so good, because the use of color has also improved immensely. Previously, we had the typical anime shading of a base color and then some highlights and shadows. But even back then, they knew that you could make it look way more detailed while still staying true to the style, as evidenced by early splash art still looking amazing. Compare that to now, where subtle gradients are used to make sure that the color doesn't look too one note, and the highlights have also been smoothed out so that they're not as noticeable. You might also notice that there are shadows weaved into the hair itself, and these are different from the drawn on shadows that are always present no matter what direction the light is. And you see how the shadows gradually come over in this spike shape following the contour of the hair? That's actually thanks to a new technology that older Genshin models simply didn't use at all. Because we could see that before, it was just a simple wipe, and it just goes side to side, not really following the shape of the hair. Thanks to this additional texture called a normal map, on its own it looks a little bit weird, but the different levels of blue signify which parts of the model should be lit first, and so the game has the information necessary to light the hair up unevenly, making for a much more accurate portrayal of lighting. Ether's face is nearly identical between his two forms, but Lumine's was noticeably cleaned up because Genshin's female characters tend to have more face details. Alright, well, they did both get their face silhouettes cleaned up, specifically that their chins are less pointy than they were before. And this was just a simple change in the density of the polygons in the chin area, allowing them to get a much smoother curve around the chin. Previously, Lumine's face relied a lot more on textures. It's fairly noticeable that the top of her eyelash doesn't really connect to the side of her eye here, and in solid view we could see that separation, which they fixed in the new version as it goes all the way down. Same thing with her lower eyelashes, which get blurrier as you get close because you're stretching out a 1024 square pixel texture across the face, as opposed to modeled out details that retain their relative positioning and therefore clean lines, no matter the distance to the camera. The eyelashes being connected also allows for this smooth gradient that goes all the way across, and they made the lip color a little bit more prominent as well. Also, here's the hair comparison for Lumine, because I forgot I didn't show that. The stuff I just talked about regarding modeled versus textured details is also very relevant to the outfits. If the details are really small, it usually makes sense to just leave it to the texture, since adding more polygons to the model requires more computing power, but recently it seems like Hoyo is prioritizing visuals over optimization. Regardless of how you feel about that, the newer models objectively look a lot better because of this change in philosophy. A clear example of this is with Lumine's thighs, and since some people are curious, no, they did not buff them in the new outfit. Previously, this wing part was just a texture applied to the leg, which we can tell because it looks really flat and also it gets blurrier when it's up close. On the newer version though, they kept the same concept but actually have it fully modeled out, with really clean sharp lines and a subtle but noticeable difference in height. And actually most of the things on these boots are fully modeled out. We can see the height difference in the layers of the boots, and even this tiny little gold piece in the back is fully modeled out so that it is clean sharp lines. Because some of the geometry gets kind of irregular, Since game engines need everything to be in triangles to render properly, it ends up adding a lot of extra polygons. All the extra details start to add up pretty quickly, which is why this Lumine has 83,087 triangles, meanwhile the original only has 34,872. Now, despite there being less reliance on textures, they are still used to add detail without adding more vertices in certain places, like right here, and here, and here. So they are holding back in some areas at least a little bit. But also just the use of textures in general is much more efficient. This is the old hair texture for Lumine. As you can tell, there's a lot of empty space which isn't being used. Nowadays, each individual texture is much more packed to fit in not just more details overall, but make the important stuff bigger and thus higher resolution on the model. This frees up the designers to add extra things like textures on the underside of clothing. Like underneath the shoes is a place you'll look much less often compared to the rest of the outfit, but nowadays it's common for them to add fully unique textures that don't appear anywhere else on the model. Underneath the dresses is a place that some people might look more often, and we can see that they went from having absolutely no texture under there to having ones that are different on both sides. And lastly, I want to comment on some really subtle, really technical stuff that I just think is really cool. It has to do with the mesh, which is the collection of vertices, edges, and faces that make up the shape of the model. If we look at the hands, you probably think they are fundamentally the same between before and now because the shape looks pretty much identical. However, if we look at the meshes, we can see additional loops of polygons around where the fingers meet the hand. And then for the finger joints, we can see additional polygons around the outside that then converge and condense on the inside, whereas previously they just would have went all the way around. These adjustments are optimized for deformation so that when they bend, they look more natural than they would otherwise. And then we can see that the old one, when it bends, just looks slightly off. There are just these minor imperfections here. You'd probably never notice these things on your own, but I do really appreciate them and all the work the modelers have been putting in over the past few years to make our beloved characters look better. Now, if you ask me why they haven't just completely phased out the old models in favor of these newer outfits, I have no idea. They look so good, like why aren't we using them?